All right, thanks, Justin. So I'm Bob Rowell. I work for Webroot. I live here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I've worked with Webroot for 12 years, but I've been in the security, law enforcement, now cybersecurity industry since about 1984. Technically, I was working at Six Flags in 1984 as a 17-year-old security guard, but still, it is physical security, industrial security. So I do have a lot of experience in this field. I've worked with small business for years. Most of our business now, we sell to small business. And we do a lot of managed services. So as Datamax, changes from some of the products they're using, we're hoping that they decide to go with Webroot instead of Kaspersky or something else. But that's really not going to be the focus of the presentation, so much Webroot. But I want to give you some information about security threats and how to prevent them, what things you can do at the network with your users and on the individual machines to block these threats. So as I was going through this presentation this week, I was trying to think of ways to tie this into football, right? Because we're all very themed, all the nice graphics and everything, and Larry's going to be here later. Personally, I do have a story. I met Larry in 1993 when I was a Dallas police officer, and he was a Dallas Cowboy, and they did that parade in Dallas. How many of y'all remember that parade with the riots in Dallas? You guys from Dallas? Yes, no? Okay. So there's Larry. There's Larry in the middle of this massive scene. Do you guys remember this? All right? You weren't old enough. You weren't around in 1993. You're not old enough for this. But I was one of these police officers trying to keep the crowd back. Now, how we're going to tie this into cybersecurity is this is a denial of service. This is what we call a DDoS attack, right? A denial of service where there's just too much traffic getting flooded to a certain website. So there you go. And there's some cool video on YouTube of this incident where all these people, basically the Dallas schools let out that day. They wanted everybody to celebrate, and they didn't have enough police officers there, and we kind of let everybody down. An interesting story, I met an officer who was at one of the 70s parades. So he was a retired officer. His badge number was in the triple digits. And so we called him an old head. He knew what he was talking about. And he said, "Son, you don't have enough police here for this crowd. You're going to be in trouble." It was definitely an experience. And I may have met Larry Brown as their car drove over us. Okay, so what we want to talk about today are the different vectors of attack that you can face as a business or as a consumer. For some of you, this discussion may apply more to what you're doing at home, but certainly I sell to business. Datamax provides these services, but if you're a managed service customer of Datamax, a lot of these things are going to be taken care of. You already have some of the best technology, you have the best services, so a lot of these things are taken care of, but this will help educate you so you can ask the right questions and that you can think about at home and for your friends and family, to remind them of this stuff as well. So we'll go and we'll talk a little bit about what's an exploit, what's a malicious file, Web-Borne Threats. That's what we talk about and think about most of the time, being on the internet, and I'm going to get a virus from the internet. Things that users do that make them vulnerable. We saw Justin talk this morning about user education. We'll do that in a little more detail as well. We're not protecting our data very well. Things like Dado can help with that. And we want to look at our networks and our devices and make sure they're not vulnerable. Okay. Now, I won't go into a lot of technical details. I want to keep it fairly high level because that's kind of the level I'm at. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a threat researcher. I'm a sales guy primarily. So we want to talk about some of this stuff and what it means. So exploits, vulnerabilities, and malware. These are three separate things, and they work in conjunction with themselves or with each other. So a vulnerability is something that exists on hardware or in software. So Windows could have a vulnerability. Your refrigerator now can be vulnerable, and it can have what we call a known vulnerability. So that's something that somebody researches and they find this hole in the software, and they publish it on the dark web, or they publish it in places where people can take advantage of those vulnerabilities. In order to do that, they use what's called an exploit. So the exploits are things that are normally sold online, again, in the dark web and on forums that I've never been to but apparently exist. And so they're selling these things for, how many users you can attack or how many dollars you get in return. There's a lot of money. We'll talk about the money here in a minute. But the exploits are the things that also our own government is creating. So they're creating these exploits to crack into software. And then the payload, the result of an exploit being run against your hardware, your software, is a malicious file then being downloaded and executed on your PC. Now, as consumers or as users, we are a lot of times the vulnerability and the exploit all together, right? So we're vulnerable because we don't know what not to click on. Hey, I'm Bob.
Hi.
Thanks for stopping in. We don't know what not to click on, so we're the ones running that executable, okay? But we don't always have to be involved. So there are other mechanisms that occur, and they can be totally automatic. My phone right now, if I'm connected to the wrong Wi-Fi and it has a vulnerability, like I haven't updated from iOS 1 or 2, right? Let's say it's really old, then there could be vulnerabilities that exist in any kind of hardware. These cameras all have Wi-Fi. They could all theoretically be exploited. So the results of that are some things that you have heard of. So the end result are things like encrypting ransomware, and this has exploded in the past few years. Going from a $1 billion industry to a $5 billion industry this year, and it's only halfway through. This is big business. So much so that this is when things began with Crypto Wall, Crypto Locker in 2013, and in 4 short years, these are all the individual kind of bits of different malware. And I've got some notes that I'm not seeing here, so forgive me if I.
Is everybody familiar with Crypto Wall? Crypto Locker?
Oh, yeah.
What that was a virus that encrypted your files.
Yeah, we'll talk about. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that. Yeah. But I was missing my notes page, so I just want to make sure I'm covering some of the details. The way I opened up the PowerPoint was fancy, but it didn't work. So like Richard was saying, these types of encrypting ransomware, that's kind of what it does, right? It gets into your files and encrypts them with government level, DoD level encryption, and makes it impossible for you to get to those files. Now, most of these types of, and the reason why the money is so big is because they're collecting a ransom from you to recover your files. And so my one piece of advice, that if you remember nothing from my talk, it's don't pay the ransom, right? I'm sorry, but we're the problem. If we're paying these guys, they're making $5 billion, why would they stop, right? So don't pay the ransom. It's like spam. The reason why spam works is because we buy pills on the internet after clicking on the spam, right? I mean, otherwise they wouldn't use it. Now, there's spam that's being used for phishing and those types of threats, but we still get spam, and you wonder, why is this still coming? Why I don't never click. People do. So if you pay the ransom, you're feeding this criminal machine. Now, you're saying, Bob, but my data is lost, I can't get it back. But that's what Datamax is here for. That's what their vendors like Dato and your backup, that's what that's for, so that you have your access to your data. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah. So tons of innovation in this industry, because I work for a fairly small security company. The security industry is in the billions and billions of dollars, but we can't pay our engineers what these guys are making. Okay, we can't pay our folks to do what they do. We can't afford it. So there's very smart people, mostly in Eastern Europe and Asia, that are coming up with this stuff, and they're making a lot of money. So that's why it's so incredibly dangerous right now. And by the way, if you do have any questions, this is not like a TED Talk or anything. You're not going to interrupt me. Just please ask the questions as we go. In fact, I have a question. So we're going to give away 2 gift cards, right? Okay, great. I have one question. So today's in 2007, there was $5 billion in revenue from these threats. What was that first number I gave out? What was it? $1 billion. All right, that's our first winner. We'll have a couple more as we go. Thank you. Some other threats that came out just very recently, and really we had another one yesterday. These WannaCry and NotPetya. These are exploits that are taking advantage of the vulnerability that Microsoft has patched like 2 years ago. In this bulletin, Microsoft from 2016, Microsoft is recommending that everyone turn off this thing called SMB. So it's a little unknown process that can run like Vista and XP and the older operating systems used to communicate internally, but these folks found out how to exploit it over the internet and can now push code into your machine using this capability. So this runs on what we call a port. I think it's port 445, and there's a very easy way. Now again, as a consumer and a user, I can go to a website. There's a guy named Steve Gibson, and he runs a site called Gibson Research. So you go to Gibson Research, and you can click on this test called Shields Up. And this will look at your network and see if any of this stuff is exposed to the internet. Because there are still millions of people that are exposed to these threats. And what we're seeing is a lot of times these will come out and it'll affect one part of the world. A lot of times in Asia, they're not running on legitimate versions of Windows, so they're not getting the updates, right? They're not automatically updating. So if you've got automatic updates turned on, a lot of this stuff is not affecting you. So these things are spreading like crazy. Once it gets on one machine on the network, it can go throughout the network like a worm and spread to all the other machines. And this is what we saw in Eastern Europe: shut down grocery stores, shut down and destroy FedEx facilities, not destroy, but their data was gone because it's a ransomware that that took out their data. Now some of these were really bad. Like I think WannaCry didn't really, the encryption didn't even work. It just went and just destroyed your information. So you could pay the ransom, but you never got your money back. Now most of these, it does work. You do get your data. You do get your data back. They do give you an encryption key, but you're not gonna pay for that, right? You're not gonna pay the ransom. All right. So those are exploits, vulnerabilities, and malicious files, and kind of how they work together. And the fact that you could be, your machine right now sitting at home or at the office could be being hacked by someone if you're vulnerable to this type of intrusion. Again, you've got protection with SonicWall, you have protection with Kaspersky, a lot of you, if you're using the managed services, or with Webroot, you're protected from the malicious files, but you also have a data backup. But if you didn't have all that, you could potentially be exposed to these types of threats. Now, as you do your own browsing of the internet, you're going to run into things like malvertising, and we threw botnets into this as well because it's another type of a web threat that's happening on the internet, but it's not something you necessarily have to do. Malware sites would be somewhere that you went looking for a free download and you went to the wrong site. That's what my son does all the time. So that's kind of a malware site where he's downloading just files and running them. And like I said before, then he's the vulnerability, right, inside the network. So some examples of malvertising. We come up with all these cute words, right, where we combine all the different terms. So malvertising is just advertising on a legitimate site that takes advantage of vulnerabilities in your browser. So all you're doing is you could be on CNN, you could be on Fox News, you could be on CBS, and they've served up an advertising that is now either gotten hacked or somebody took over that advertising network. There's all kinds of stuff happening on the back end, but CNN doesn't even know about it. They have no knowledge of this threat. But your browser, because there's a vulnerability, again, if you're not up to date, we have to patch everything, then this code could run in your browser. Something I've highlighted up there is that to evade detection, a lot of these tools they won't run if they run in a virtual machine. So you guys understand what a virtual machine is versus a real machine. So a lot of people in IT, especially security researchers, will use virtual machines because we gack up the whole machine and we have to restore it. So we can just push a button and it restores that machine. Well, this malware can see that and it won't run. Like I've seen before, you click on these executable, you click on these files, and they just won't run at all because it knows you're trying to research it. So they're very sophisticated. It's very difficult to detect. So you have to provide extra layers of protection to keep from getting bit by these things. One great way as a user to prevent this kind of stuff is put an ad blocker in your browser. So use multiple browsers and have your ad blocker plus or what have you, and it will block all the good ads and all the bad ads. Okay, so and that's a good thing. You don't necessarily need all that stuff popping up anyway. So ad blockers are a great way to do that. Here's an example of a botnet. So you hear all the time about, and you probably have cameras and the big thing yesterday was the Amazon key. Did y'all hear about that? Where Amazon wants to be able to go into your house and deliver a package? Well, that's a whole nother issue, right? But those devices, your door lock, your baby cam, your nanny cams, your baby monitors, these are all devices now on the internet. And they're vulnerable because these companies haven't put any security processes in place. There's no protection. This morning, Justin was talking about passwords, using strong passwords. And here's another example of a list of known frequent passwords. And they just use these tables of passwords. With modern computing, right, we're all doing things much faster. They can just bombard your machines with thousands and thousands of passwords in seconds, and they will get in and turn this. Now they turn this against you. You've been using it for good. Now it's being used for evil, and all it's used to do is bombard other websites with these DDoS attacks. Okay. So we'll go back to the Dallas parade, right? Just imagine all these people in downtown Dallas. You can't drive down the roads because there's just too much traffic. And that's what all these devices are doing. We call them zombies, we call them botnets, what have you. And they can all be directed at a specific person or a corporation like Dime DNS provides some core internet capabilities. They provide DNS service. So if they take that down, then you can't get on the internet. You're basically down. If that's your DNS provider, you can't get on there. So they can use these devices to literally break the internet. And we're hearing about, so this Mirai attack was hundreds of thousands of devices were hacked and used to flood these networks. By the way, if you're on Time Warner Cable and your entire neighborhood is storming some website, you're not going to get on the internet either. Because there's all that traffic goes both ways. All right, so we need to make sure we're not using default passwords on these devices. We need to check and do our own due diligence to make sure that your devices are secure. But there are things out there now there's one called Reaper and IO Troop that potentially have millions of devices already in the botnet. They haven't been unleashed yet, but this could be a major event. So we need to make sure we're not part of the problem. And I don't know how to do that except talking, let's get more people so we can solve the problem. Okay, so devices are vulnerable, machines are vulnerable, we're also vulnerable. We've been talking about, passwords and phishing, or we talked about weak passwords. So there are tools for that. I think Justin mentioned, I can't remember the one he mentioned, but there are several nice password managers. I use LastPass. So it's on all my devices. I can share with my family. If I die, my wife can get my passwords, right? So that's a good thing. So use some sort of password management. So not only can you keep track of them, but you can use strong passwords to without remembering them, without writing them down. Okay. So users are also vulnerable at the desktop with things like remote desktop protocol. These are just common services that are enabled. Again, checking the internet, and this one's 445, not the other one. This one is. I know you'll need that information. 445. But yeah, you can check these. Steve Gibson's website. You use that to hit your home network. You can see if any of these ports are open. Because even though you shouldn't have any of this running, in the United States, there's like 1.2 million people that are right now exposed. Their ports are wide open. Okay, they don't have their router configured right, their modem. They don't have they don't have sonic wall. They don't have a firewall. They're just out on the internet now. Half of those are probably security researchers, right? Looking at what we call a honeypot. You want people to come in and steal your stuff so you can figure out how they do it. So there's a lot of security research in there, but there is a ton of devices that are exposed. Now Justin did a really good presentation on phishing. So just suffice to say that is still a thing. You do have to be very careful when you not only click on an email or read or respond to email. Make sure you're checking the domain name so that it's legitimate. But that's not always easy. In that discussion this morning, he put up an example of Equifax and the site you would go to see if you're been exposed to that breach. And the URL was like misafeeq.com. So there's no way that you would know that that's the next. Now it's legitimate, but it's very hard to tell. So you need to be very careful with this stuff. These are very hard to tell the difference. We could play, like we were this morning, we could play one of these things. It's not like the other, but it's very hard to see. And Webroot and other antivirus, anti-malware solutions have tools in the products that help us detect that for you. So we can tell if it's a legitimate site. One, we've got it in our database of sites so that when you click on it, we know it's good and we can allow it. But if we've never seen it before, we'll assess the content. And this content is not linking back to, this bank and their servers. It's linking to some other weird servers, so we can see that. But again, let's go back to the password management. If you're using one of those automated tools and you go to your bank website, LastPass will fill the form out for you for that domain. But if it's not the right domain, you're not going to be able to really easily put your password in there. So that's a clue. Like, if I'm having to go through a step now to cut and paste my password into my bank site, something's wrong. Okay? So that's a clue, a Blue's Clue, to keep you from going and just jumping through that hoop, because it's so easy. I'm in the business. I get LinkedIn requests all the time. That's how I'm going to get it, right? Because I just see them. I'm like, good, boom, I'm with you. I know this person. But there's no reason why these can't be malicious. Unless you're checking the URLs. So be very careful with that and use that password manager. I think that'll help a ton. Backups. We just had a presentation from Dado. You gotta have a local backup, and you have to have backup in the cloud that's encrypted. Okay? You want to encrypt your data locally, have it sent to the cloud, and be stored encrypted in the cloud so that no one can get access to your data. You're using a tool to encrypt it locally. You also want something on site that's not connected to your computers. All right? So we need tape drives. We need something, right, that is not connected to the network. And the reason why is that these encrypting ransomware, they go from your computer onto your servers, into your data, and all of your storage, and they can encrypt all those files. So you have to have those capabilities. Dado and the guys from Datamax completely support that and provide those capabilities. So this is not anything new that I'm telling you, but if you're at home, right, now take yourself back to the house, do you have that same capability? Do you have a local copy? Do you have something in the cloud? I use the Amazon, what they call Glacier. They have a cool product. It's a little techie, but they charge you more money to take your data out They don't charge a whole lot to put it in. So I've got terabytes of data, and it costs me like $3 a month. So if I just need one file, it's kind of a hassle. So I have something locally on a USB that I can keep disconnected and back up once a week. So those are the kind of things you need to look into for home use as well. And then there's just who has access to your data. Those types of controls, they need to be audited. They need to be put in place. You need to here comes a cool football tie. You need to practice your solution. You need to practice what happens when this goes wrong, and that's what happens a lot of times in IT and in security. Is we bought all the cool products. We saw the sales guy up talking about it. He sold us all these cool stuff. But we're not using it right. We didn't get their best practice call. We didn't talk to the SEs. We didn't do the right thing. So when comes time to get our backup and we don't have it, I got to pay the ransom, right? So, practice is a good way to succeed on the football field and also in business. So who can tell me, because he did such good practice, this is for a gift card, what year did Larry Brown, what year did Larry Brown win the MVP for the Super Bowl? I'll take what year, now he was in the 90s. I'll either take the season or the year.
95 season, 96 Super Bowl.
There we go, winner. Yeah. And it's up there. But you'd have to know what year the 30 was. Yeah. All right. So we'll blow through some of these here. Obviously, these types of breaches, this type of data management doesn't happen to small business. It's happening, in the billions and wrecking, data like at FedEx and other corporations. I mean, it's similar to, if you've been in the military, anybody that was in the military, a repository in St. Louis burned down 20, 30 years ago, and they lost all these records, right? We have always heard about the library in Alexandria, right, that burned down, thousands of years ago or whatever, and we lost all those records. That's happening today, and we're having a hard time, recreating that data, and there's no excuse, right? We need those proper controls. We need the data backup. Yes, sir?
I'm just curious, has anybody done an assessment of the damage or the loss of records in like Houston and Florida and all that from hurricanes?
No. No, but and it's a good reason to have.
Probably a selling point for sure.
Absolutely, for managed services, for disaster recovery, for offline backup. You have to have that information in the cloud. If you're storing it all locally on tape drives, then you're done, right? That's lost. And just for any kind of cloud, SaaS product, if you don't have servers on site, if your servers are all managed in the cloud, then you don't have to worry as much about that. And we're really headed that way for sure. So again, I'll just remind you, patch things, make sure users, and you don't have capabilities from outside that are unmanaged. If you have remote control into your networks, they need to be locked down. You need to have proper controls in place. A lot of these tools that are coming from the CIA, coming from the NSA, our own governments are writing these exploits to use them as weapons against other governments. And that's the way we're fighting wars right now in cyberspace, okay? We're trying to protect our information, and we're trying to make sure that those people don't have the capability to attack us. So we're doing some sort of cyber warfare now, but this stuff gets out. And recently, these NSA or the CIA exploits were stolen and leaked out. So if in your little business, if everyone has admin rights to all the servers and all the machines, and someone gets access to one machine, you've lost your whole network. So user management, user rights are very important. It's a pain not to be able to do things on your own machine. It's a pain to have to ask somebody to use their device, but paying the ransom is a pain as well. And again, some of these things have been around forever. This HeartBleed thing is 2 years old. There's still thousands and thousands of people exposed to the threat. So my bottom line is you need to have a multi-layered approach. That's going to be your endpoint antivirus, your educating your users, which is something that Webroot is going to provide now pretty soon. Justin gave a little pitch up there earlier, and he used PhishMe as an example. Great product. Also, KnowBe4, yeah. So KnowBe4, PhishMe, and now Webroot, literally next week, will come out with a product to help educate your users. And what we mean is, we do anti-phishing campaigns, so you can send your users fake phishing emails, and you can even do it personally. You can sign up an account and send one to your mom or whatever, right? And try to work together to learn more about this. And the key there with the user education is to give them some training and then test it, right? So these fake emails would come in, if they click, they get a message, whoops, and maybe they get some more training on top of that. So you want to link those things together. I call out DNS protection, but any kind of network layer of protection, firewalls, content security, things that are intervening for you to protect your machines from not only the users getting out and going to malicious sites, but also these exploits, these vulnerabilities from coming from externally. And then backup and patch management. So I think I'll wrap it up there because the rest is kind of a Webroot sales pitch. And if you want to hear more about Webroot, I encourage you to come out. We're hanging out in the booth over here on the way to lunch. So I'm sure we all want to get some barbecue. But feel free to ask any questions if you want now. Oh, we need one more. We have one more. So the first person with their hand up, true or false? Okay, how am I going to do this? True or false? Pay the ransom? No, he's a winner. Do not pay the ransom. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out to Datamax's open house.